A man finds himself in a small town plagued with death and corruption due to the presence of two bosses at war with each other over control of the town. With nothing but a weapon at his side and an overwhelming need to make money, the outsider finds himself in the perfect position to play the two sides against each other and make as much money as possible with little regard for the wellness of the town or its people. This is a very basic description of the plot of Akira Kurosawa's 1961 film Yojimbo and Sergio Leone's 1964 remake of Yojimbo, A Fistful of Dollars. Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo achieved international success, receiving acclaim first from the Venice Film Festival in 1961 and 3 other awards across the globe in 1962. Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars received an award and a nomination from the Italian National Syndicate of Film Journalists for Best Score and Best Supporting Actor. Since their release, both Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars have been rescreened, renegotiated, re-released, re-rendered, remastered, redistributed, and respected all over the world. While there is no doubt that both films have done well, it is interesting to see that A Fistful of Dollars got more global recognition from the start and has been re-released to more film festivals and redistributed in more formats than Yojimbo, despite Yojimbo's more successful debut. A Fistful of Dollars' post-debut success may be attributed to the idea that this film was a revival of the Western genre, and the development of the spaghetti Western for which Sergio Leone has become most famous for during his career as a filmmaker. It is interesting that a remake should be credited for the revival of a genre, especially when it so closely resembles its origin. Could it be said that Yojimbo, rather than A Fistful of Dollars, revived the Western genre? Or that the scholarly discourse of the two films shaped our views of who did what and how effectively it influenced the evolution of the American Western genre? To come to any conclusion to this cinematic conundrum, we must thoroughly examine the two films and the scholarly discourse. Scholars and critics fall all over the spectrum when it comes to their opinions of how A Fistful of Dollars affected the evolution of the Western genre, and to what degree Yojimbo influenced that change. But they certainly agreed on one thing: the Western most definitely changed. Whether they believe it was the change in aesthetic, or the change in the morals of the protagonist and the bleak view of life on the frontier that sparked this change in the Western genre, is up for debate. All we can do is watch the films and assess for ourselves. Since we don't have time to watch both films in their entirety, I have selected a scene in both films in which the protagonist proves his worth to the two town bosses, and then afterwards we shall analyze the scene with the quotes from the scholars and critics in mind.
I'm Miguel Rojo. I want to talk to you. I'm Miguel. I hear you're hiring on men. Well, I might just be available. I gotta tell you before you hire me. I don't work cheap.
用心棒にどうだ腕は今見せる
Adios, amigo. Did you get the idea? We don't like to see bad boys like you in town. Go get your mule. You let him get away from you?
See, that's what I want to talk to you about. He's feeling real bad.
Huh?
My mule. You see, he got all riled up when you went and fired those shots at his feet.
Hey, you made him some kind of joke.
Oh, no. You see, I understand, man, we're just playing around. Mule just doesn't get it. Of course, if you were to all apologize... I don't think it's nice you laughing. See, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him. Apologize like I know you're going to. I might convince him that you really didn't mean it.
では棺桶2ついや多分3つだ
My mistake. 4 coffins.
Let's first start in discussing the differences between our two heroes. Alan Barr and Sir Christopher Frayling both touched on this topic. Barr speaking of Sanjuro in relation to previous film heroes, and Frayling speaking of the man with no name in relation to Sanjuro. Barr stated that with Sanjuro we find neither the rigid code of the samurai nor the emotional commitment of the humanist. Sanjuro lives by his wit and his sword, and the omission of any reference to directing morality turns out not to be accidental. Frayling states that the stranger's personal style, a mixture of technical skill, hard dialogue, and tight-lipped silence when it is needed, rather like the omerta of the mafiosi, is half a world away from Kurosawa's shambling, itchy samurai. While I understand where Frayling was coming from, I have to disagree that the man with no name was half a world away from Sanjuro. In fact, if you were to apply Barr's description of Sanjuro to the man with no name, you will see that it fits rather aptly. The only difference between the two, aside from Sanjuro's flea problem, is the humanist factor. The man with no name cannot be said to be lacking the emotional commitment of the humanist like Sanjuro, because at the end of the film, he saves Marisol and her family from the Rojos, stating,
I knew someone like you once. There was no one there to help. Now get moving.
Revealing a little sentiment for his fellow man. Whereas Sanjuro saves the farmer and his family, and then when they give him their gratitude, he threatens, almost as if showing a little humanity is a weakness. Thus, we can see where Pauline Kael is coming from when she states, no more were the simple, masculine values that the Westerner stood for ancient and noble. Gone was that ritualized dream of the past that we clung to, its universe of good against evil, a reminder of an unspoiled country that the hero was fighting to keep from being destroyed. These films aren't in a universe of good and evil, like the American Westerns. There is just evil, and a man's struggle to survive within that evil, where every encounter is kill first or die. Both towns are destroyed by the end of the film, and the filmmakers leave us with no clue as to whether the townsfolk will be able to revive it. The protagonists just leave in search of their next payment. Now let's discuss the violence, and how it is portrayed in the two films. William McLean states that though the amount of bloodletting was equal in both films, some of the most upset about dollars were high on Yojimbo. This surprised me at first, because after watching the two films, I felt that Yojimbo was more violent than A Fistful of Dollars, and the reason, to me, was simple. Sanjuro uses a sword, while the man with no name uses a gun. While there may be a higher body count at the end of A Fistful of Dollars than in Yojimbo, the physical exertion necessary to kill someone with a sword is much more than that needed to kill someone with a gun. So in my opinion, when Sanjuro runs around slicing through men and hacking off arms, it creates a more visceral reaction in the viewer, whereas the gunfight in A Fistful of Dollars brings about a reaction of shock and awe. I believe that A Fistful of Dollars was more criticized in its use of violence than Yojimbo because of the way Sergio Leone builds tension before the violence. The most notable of the ways Leone builds tension in this scene is through the score. The change from the heroic music to the silence during the dialogue to the long, drawn-out, eerie note before they draw their guns makes the viewer so aware that something is about to happen that it puts them on edge. Whereas the only addition to the dialogue in Yojimbo is a windy atmosphere, making Sanjuro's sudden burst of energy a total surprise. Another notable difference between the two scenes is Leone's trademark extreme close-ups of the characters' faces. Through the extreme close-ups, the viewer is able to read the fear on the thugs' faces, in contrast to the calm on Clint Eastwood's. And this ability to emote more easily with the men who are about to die rather than the protagonists is very unsettling. Bringing me to my final point concerning the deaths. The long shot in which the four thugs are shown getting shot in A Fistful of Dollars is very different from the way people were filmed being shot in traditional westerns. In the traditional western, we would see the protagonist firing his weapon and then cut to the enemy dying. Here we see the pistol firing and the men dying in the same frame, creating an instantaneous cause and effect, similar to that of Sanjuro cutting people down in Yojimbo. Whether Leone did this as a nod to the samurai film, or because he thought it would be cool to get a shot from the pistol's point of view, I don't know. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of the many ways in which Yojimbo influenced Leone in the creation of his western. Now to get back to my original argument. Could it be said that Yojimbo and not A Fistful of Dollars revived the western genre? Before I answer that, I want you to keep in mind that this film was released during a period in which the American audience was bored with the traditional tropes and conventions of the Western genre, but that the genre was still relatively popular amongst the foreign audience. Thus, when the foreigners decided to make their own Westerns, adding their own ideas and cultural conventions to the mix, it created something so different from the established norms that American audiences welcomed the change. So, could it be said that Yojimbo and Not a Fistful of Dollars revived the Western genre? Yes. While Leone added his own stylistic touch to differentiate the two films, many of the things Leone was applauded for by critics and scholars are evident in Kurosawa's film. And even though Kurosawa did an excellent job of reworking the conventions of the Western genre in his samurai film, I don't think it would have been as easily recognized or as readily received if Sergio Leone hadn't placed it back into the textual framework of the Western.